All right, I always start with the week. This week was busy. So Sunday after church was Bill Miller's. Sunday night was some family deal. Monday night was small group. Tuesday, I don't remember what it was. Wednesday was Daddy Emmy date. Thursday was a business deal. Friday was the Majestic Theater. And yesterday was the UT game, and I didn't leave enough time to leave from the house to go up there. Plus, I'm an SMU guy, and so I wore an SMU shirt, not realizing that they were playing BYU, and the colors of BYU are blue. And I sat in a section that, as far as the eye could see, was orange. So that was super big time, fun time stuff, I'll tell you that. So that's how the week went. So last week, we were in Mark chapter 4, and I'll do a review here in a second. But last week, if I could lay an egg, that was last week. I looked out, you guys were having none of it. It's like a rocket that just went down like that, crickets, death. So I had two choices. A, I could just pretend it didn't exist, which is normally what I would do, but today we talked about conflict, right? And how instead of avoiding conflict, we would draw near. So choice 2 was, I'll try it again a different way. So actually today what I'm going to attempt to do is do it a different way again. And one of the things I thought was, man, it's too fast. I got too many things that I'm thinking of that I'm trying to convey. And sometimes it's like a boxcar accident that happens on a rail line and they just... So I did this Sunday afternoon and I haven't looked at it since. Okay? So I'm as excited and interested as you to see how this works today. Bob, you got a question? Okay. All right. So before we get started, let's start with a word of prayer, then we'll go into review. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this chance to, after especially this past week, a busy week, to take time apart to gather with these men and women, to study your word, to talk about life, to delve into your word and see how it applies to our lives, not just in this place, in this moment, but as we leave these walls and we go to Bill Miller's, or we go into our families' homes, or we go out into the world, or into work, or with friends and relatives and relationships and trips. Father, pray that we might be encouraged, that we might be touched. Father, help us this morning. Be with those that are not here. We pray this in your Son's holy name. Amen. Okay. So today I'm going to attempt to go a little bit slower, but for those of you who have not been with us recently, we're going to be in Mark chapter 4, verses 1 through 20. We're only going to read, because we did it last week, the first few verses, and I'm going to ask somebody in a moment. First thing is, why are we studying the Gospels? The Gospels are written down so that we see Christ's life. And by them being written down, we can't make up God. He can't be some mythical figure. He can't be somebody that we can't relate to, but rather someone that challenges us, that we measure ourselves with, that we challenge ourselves, that we're inspired, encouraged, and at times lots to learn. That's the important message of the Gospels. For the last few weeks, we've started in chapters 1 through 3. And here we've seen that Mark has said very explicitly that Jesus is the Son of God, that He is deity. And we've now, in the last little bit here, talked about the crowds and the parables. And we left off last week in Mark chapter 4, verse 1. And there, after calling the disciples, essentially when we talked about the week before, Jesus is on a boat. And He's on a boat talking to the crowd. So we have the crowd, we have Jesus and His followers on a boat, and He's speaking to the people that are arrayed before Him on the cliff that are there. And we come to this parable of the sower. As we, through the next few weeks, go through chapter 5, in terms of time, it's a day. We're talking about 24 hours or less than that, a day in the life of Christ. Let's start this morning in Mark chapter 4, and can somebody read before the talk about parables 1 through 9? Does somebody have it? Yes, sir.
Once again, Jesus began teaching by the lake shore. A very large crowd soon gathered around Him, so He got into a boat. Then He sat in the boat while all the people remained on the shore. He taught them by telling them many stories in the form of parables, such as this one. Listen, a farmer went out to plant some seed. As he scattered across his field, some of the seed fell on a footpath, and the birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on the shallow soil with underlying rock. The seed sprouted quickly because the soil was shallow, but the plant soon wilted under the hot sun, and since it didn't have deep roots, it died. Other seed fell among thorns that grew up and choked out the tender plants, so they produced no grain. Still, other seeds fell on the fertile soil, and they sprouted, grew, and produced a crop that was 30, 60, or even 100 times as much as had been planted. Then he said, anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand.
Thank you. Okay, if you weren't here last week, I'm going to review this parable very quickly. And while I'm talking, if you want to read all the way through verse 20, Christ gives to his disciples the interpretation. But for those of you that were here, or for those that know, the characters in this parable, okay, so a parable, an analogy, a metaphor, a short story, something that has a meaning, right? That's the object of a parable is to teach, sometimes in an indirect way. Sometimes it requires a key, a secret, if you will, something that helps in the interpretation. That's what's given after this. But in this parable, there's one, a sower. Who is the sower? Does anybody remember? So there's a sower, and there's seed, and the seed falls 4 different places. And if you read, and maybe we need to if we've forgotten, but if you go to the interpretation, the sower is Jesus, okay? And the seed represents what? The Word, right? And the Word falls on 4 different places. Now, I'd like to tell you I got a green thumb, like half. I like it when it's all nice and green and looks great without all the work. Does that make sense? So it's the work part that really kind of gets me. But for example, this morning when the light came up and I went out to this one long flower bed deal that I got against the fence, I have gone to this thing every week to try and pick weeds and different things that are there and check and see what's died or not died. But even in the week that I've been gone, it's rained, so what happened? Weeds. And the interesting one this morning, and this really doesn't pertain, but it is interesting, is for some reason there was a bunch of onions in the flower bed that had happened there. Actually, quite a big patch. The nearest onions are 30 yards away, so I don't know how that happened there, but it's constant upkeep. When it comes to seeds, right? Whenever you're planting greens, for example, the illustration I gave you is you'll mix it with sand. You'll mix all these tiny seeds together. The sand keeps it from clumping together and gives a little bit of weight. And literally, you will cast it just like this. And the seeds fall wherever the seeds are going to fall. That's how I do it. You may know other ways of doing that. So in this illustration, the sower, Jesus Christ, God, is casting the word, and it falls in 4 different places. And the 4 places that it falls represent what? Do you remember? It represents our hearts. So without too much time, what were the 4 soils, the 4 places? The first one it fell was where? The path, right? And the path it talks about here is hardened. And if you remember, the word we used is it represents hardened hearts, okay? I'm going to give you an illustration because everything that we talk about today, I really want it to be impactful as we leave this place and you go live life. As we talk about all of these things, so what? Is it purely intellectual or how does it affect us? And so in a minute, I want to go through section 2 in terms of as we go through these. I'm just telling you that now. But the second place that it lands was where? Rocky soil, right? So if you cast something into rocks, and the illustration that we used last week is that we live in South Texas. So if you go outside in your backyard and you take a shovel and you shove that shovel into the ground, how far does it go?
1 inch.
1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches. The next thing you know, you got the pickaxe and a crowbar, right? You have no better illustration of that than if you drive on 1604 with all the construction work that they're doing. If you go further down on 1604, they went up and they go down, and they go up and they go down like a roller coaster. But on the section from I-10 to 281, back when they did it originally, what did they do? They went through the hills. And so you don't have to guess in terms of how the rock is. You can literally drive, and you will see on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, it is all rock, all the way down for 20 feet or more. So rocky soil, okay? What was the third soil that it fell on? Brambles, thorns, right? There it talked about the seed took root in the interpretation, but it was choked up with the cares of the world, and it choked out the plant. And then the fourth seed fell where? Fertile soil. And the word in the interpretation there in 18, 19, and 20 is it talks about it being fruitful, okay? So the path, hardened hearts, rocky soil, right? Shallow soil there that gets choked up by thorns, and then deep soil that results in fruit. Okay, that's the quick review out of 45 minutes last time. So here's one I want to talk about today. It's a question of depth. It's a question of depth. If you take that little seed, and last week I had a pumpkin seed that I showed you. If you take that seed on the path, where is it in relationship to the ground?
On top.
It's on top, okay? In terms of the rocky soil, where is it? You said 1 inch, right? Amongst the rocks. It's down just a little bit. In the third illustration with the thorns that choke it out, you can imagine that seed being where? A little bit further down. But in order for the tree to grow, to be fruitful, where is the seed? The seed is far down, okay? So, here is the illustration and the premise as we talk today, and I do want to hopefully have a conversation. But for this illustration of a fruitful heart, which we'll talk about in a moment, it is a question of how deep the seed, and the seed represents what? The Word. How deep the Word goes down into our hearts. Do you see this illustration? I'll say it a different way. To the degree that the seed goes deep into our hearts is to the degree that we will lead and live fruitful lives. Do you see that statement? Okay, let me back up. Horticulture again. So, in that same flower bed that the onion sprouts came up, that, by the way, I just looked at the onion sprouts. I did not bend over and pick them all out, okay? That will be a different day, right? But in there I have 2 redbud trees, okay? One redbud tree is about this tall, and they're 2 years old. The other redbud tree is only this tall. They are planted from me to that window. What is the difference between those two? They both get water, they both get sun, right? But one is 2 or 3 feet taller than the other one, both planted on the same day.
So quality of soil.
Quality of the soil to some degree, but I went and checked, right? One of them, the root system, is what? Deep. The one that's not growing, for whatever reason, is almost still the same ball that it was before. Okay? Right next to each other, same flower bed, same planter, right? Same weather, rain, sun, light, but from here to there, a difference in how much it produces, looks, vibrancy, size, and all because of the roots. Second illustration, horticulture. Anybody like peaches? Okay, have you planted a peach tree? Before the squirrels come, if you plant that peach tree and it grows up and it's got and it's going to be fruitful, can you go out there and pick an apple off of that peach tree? Why not? Because it's not an apple tree. Okay, let's flip it. Can I go to the apple tree and get peaches? No. Okay, let me ask you another illustration. I got an apple tree over there at the exit sign. I got a peach tree over here. Can I go take the peaches off the peach tree, and march them over here to the apple tree with a staple gun or something like that, or big duct tape, and if I duct tape the peaches to the apple tree, is that apple tree now a peach tree? Why? It's not the same, right? Because it's not, right? And I can't transfer. If I transferred it, what would happen to that fruit on that tree? It would rot and die, right? So, the argument I gave you last week is this. If this was my heart, this bottle of water, and you notice this time I use water instead of Coke, because last time I had to clean it up because of the sugar, okay? Whatever is inside our heart, okay, right, is going to come out. So a peach tree with a root system, whether deep or shallow, if it's producing fruit, will be peaches. An apple tree is going to be apples, right? And what is inside me is going to come out. Okay, now, here's the next illustration. What I believe in life, whatever it might be, completely dictates how I live life. Do you hear that sentence? What you believe about life, whether you're consciously thinking about it or not, will change or dictate how you live life. So, for example, I'll give you a silly example. If you believe that regulations and laws are merely advice or even something to be ignored, how are you going to live your life? Well, from my perspective, laws are, and I can take it or leave it. It means if we're driving, right, I'll use this example, you better get out of my way, right, because I might go 90 miles an hour. Why? Because it's more a guideline than a rule, right? Do you see that? Because I believe one thing, it totally dictates. By the same token, the example that I can use is this. I'll use this illustration. If you take two people and you take them outside to dig a ditch, okay? And one guy's digging the ditch for $12 an hour. And he's going to work in the hot Texas sun, 110 degrees, all day for 8 hours, okay? How do you think, or can you imagine, that person might be digging? It's just a job, slowly, right? I got to make it 8 hours, right? What if I went to the second person and I said, if you dig this ditch from here to there, and if you get it done today, I will give you $1 million. Okay? They're both digging ditches. They're both in the same ground. They're both next to each other. One person, $12 an hour. The other person, $1 million. What they believe dictates how you live your life. How do you think the person for $1 million is going to dig his ditch? Fast, with joy, with excitement, right? With love, right? Even though it's 110 degrees. What we believe matters, and it dictates how we live our life. Okay, so hang on, let me get my illustration. So, and I'm going to flip the page here in just a moment and go through the diagram.
I thought you were going to flip the water.
I'm not, you know what? I'm going to hit the water in a second, okay? I'm going to tie them all together because these are important and I want you to think about it. I may present to you, okay, I am a good person. I do good things. I work hard, right? I say nice things. I build people up, right? I'm using myself as an example. And as far as you're concerned, wow, look at John. What a great, upstanding, nice guy that he is, okay? But inside, maybe I believe a few things, okay? Maybe I believe I'm justified in anger. Maybe I believe that I am justified in resentment. Maybe I believe that I don't have to do a certain things. And you have no idea, okay? But when circumstances get hard, conflict, we talked about it this morning, something happens, health, loss, financial trouble, relationship issues. When something happens, I said what you believe dictates how you live. And so when the sun comes, when the heat comes, when conflict comes, when trouble comes, what can happen? Whatever I believe, whatever's inside of me, when the heat comes, oh, did I spill it on you? All right. Well, I drank half of it, so it's not coming out, right? If I were to hit it, right, it's going to come out. Do you see that? Okay. So, with that preparatory stuff in mind, I want to talk about depth. And that took 10 minutes to review a lot of that. If you flip to the back, let me talk about this diagram for a minute. And again, it's a question of depth. It'd be from right to left. And this is all the clip art I could steal off of the internet, okay? I say steal, and here I'm being recorded, that I borrowed off of the internet. From right to left, you have a seed that's laying on the ground, okay? Somebody said earlier it's laying on the path, and that is what it's doing. The next one over falls on rocky soil. That's a droopy plant that's there. How far did the seed go? 1 inch, he said, right? And then we have the third one, which is a tree that has not a lot of fruit that's shown on there, but it has some words that I'm going to go over in a minute. And the shallow root system you see that's underneath there, and it's got thorns on it, okay? So if that blue line that goes across was the ground, again, it's a question of depth. I'm going to talk about the cross at the end, but let's go to the left-hand side. And there we have a fruitful tree with a root system that goes very deep, okay? Stability, a tree that is fruitful. The fruit that's hanging on that tree you'll find in Galatians 5. Love, peace, forbearance, goodness, kindness, gentleness, peace, joy, right? The fruits of the Spirit. So I want to contrast for just a minute a fruitful tree, okay? A bountiful peach tree, a bountiful apple tree, okay? And we tying them all together to make sure I'm clear. The root system is that is a fruitful tree. The root system is down deep so it can support it, so this fruit comes out. The fruit is both visible to others. The fruit can be enjoyed, right? It is a blessing and it's fruitful. And now flip back over to that tree on the left, and that tree is what? Devoid of leaves and fruit, okay? With a shallow root system. So I want to talk about this today before we talk about the gospel, because it's a question of depth and I'm trying to make it meaningful. But I do want to talk about some of the words that I put on the right-hand tree. Rashness, impatience, immorality, animosity, despondency, conflict, ruthlessness, resentment. All of those words are from Webster's antonym engine on Google as the opposite of the fruits of the Spirit. Okay? Now, if you flip back over, I want to do number 2. It's a question of depth, and I try and show the arrow going down. But now just a conversation for 15 minutes. Let's just talk about it as we go through. So the first question is this. It's a series of questions and then some scenarios. And I was trying as I left last time to say, look, how do I make this more real? Okay? How do you make it to where somebody can see it? So the first question is this. Do you believe that Christ existed and that He is God of the universe? Or do you believe that at best Christ was a godlike man who did some great things, or at worst didn't exist at all? You see the two differences between the question? Okay? So that question first applies to which soil? A hardened heart, okay? The seed can't even go down below, right? To the degree that it goes deep, already we have a decision tree. We've talked before over the last few weeks about how when presented with Christ, either A, you think He's crazy, B, you think He's a liar about who He is, or C, He's the Lord, and therefore I have to do something about it. And that same question that they had then, the crowd, is the same question that we're faced with today. Either A, he's just some crazy guy. B, he's a liar. He didn't exist at all, or if he did, he was just a good man. He was a good teacher, but he wasn't deity. Or C, he is who he says he was, and therefore there's something that I've got to do about it. Before we leave this one, because several of you have asked over the past few weeks about this, as you talk to your friends, your family relationships, and we've talked about how the Gospels were written down so that we might have a record of Christ, just in layman's term, without getting into this historical record or that historical record, or analyzing this context or the other, what are some reasons that we can have faith that what we read in Mark is true, that it is an eyewitness account, that it is something that happened and was reality? I'm just asking, what are some reasons? How do you know that this, or just take Mark, how do you know in your life that, you know what, everything I read I can trust? Ideas?
Because God cannot lie to us.
Okay, because God can't lie to us. But at the end of the day, somebody typed this. Somebody wrote this, right? It's a word of man that was put down. In layman's term, I'm just asking. This is an apologetic. But it comes up. My kids asked me this 3 weeks ago at the corner bakery, right? What do you tell them? What do you tell your grandkids? In a way that they might understand. Thought?
When you pray, sometimes you have to wait, but he shows up.
Okay. A good thing to share, right? What else? Yes, ma'am.
I think, because if somebody's asking, did this, how do I know it really happened? If somebody's writing something down and there are people still alive who saw it, they have the opportunity to say it didn't happen that way, or yes, it did.
Okay.
There were people who died because they believed it happened.
I'm going to come back. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
You can look at creation
Okay.
and know that God exists.
Okay, so you're saying look out. We can look out at the sun, stars. It was a beautiful sunset yesterday. Somebody else.
There's overwhelming copies within decades or a century of the original manuscripts written in different languages that there are still proof of that have even been dated. So you have the word of mouth, and you have other instances that have been proven that there's enough proof that within, they don't have the originals, but within just a few decades or within 100 years are copies of what was written
Okay.
in overwhelming amounts at that point.
So let me give you 3 or 4. And again, these are something you can use around a dinner table. In the prevalence of the social media and the like, it's something that Emily, 13, can understand. But I'll give you 3 or 4. The first one I would give is yours. Okay? We talked about at the very beginning how Mark was written most likely somewhere in 60 AD or thereabouts. Maybe it was in the 50s, maybe in the late 60s. You're talking about 30 years in between these eyewitness accounts are written and the time that Christ was alive. This past weekend, I'm at this UT game. I'm not a UT guy, okay? I'm an SMU guy. This weekend was homecoming at SMU. My phone, even as I'm sitting here on my watch, is dinging at me still. And it did all day yesterday with all of my swimming buddies that were there at homecoming talking to each other by using me in this group text with 15 other people. On one hand, you're like, oh, that's neat. On the other hand, you're like, for the love of Pete, enough already. You know, you got a text in there saying, I'm here, where are you, right? And those kind of things. But all of that was 28 years ago. 20-some people on a swim team, to your point, right? I couldn't say, oh, you were there, right? Because you weren't. And there are people still alive at this moment, even though we've lost some, who could stand up and say, that didn't happen. I couldn't, they could not, let's use Christ for example, say that Christ got on a magic carpet and flew around all over the earth. Why? 1 Corinthians 15 says that not just a few witnesses, but hundreds of witnesses were there to see it. So the first example is these things were written in such a period of time to where people could raise their hand and say, this happened or it didn't happen. That's very compelling. Now, let me give you a few others. I like to read. December 9th at 6 o'clock, hopefully you're coming to the house. I'll get details so you can see where I live if you wanted to, but we're going to have dinner and a Christmas tree and just fellowship one with another. But when you're there, I have thousands of books. You're going to walk in and say, this guy is a hoarder or a weirdo or something like that. There are lots of books. There's books everywhere. There's books in corners. They're just everywhere. And your next question is going to be, have you read them all? Almost, right, is the answer to that one. A few I still want to get to, but I find another title. My point is, I read an awful lot, okay? Different time periods, different genres, etc. But let me give you another example. If you were going to read or write, a story that had main characters in it. So as you read the Gospels, who are the main characters? Christ. 2 weeks ago, he named them. They were his disciples, right? And then we have the crowd, we have the protagonists, the Pharisees, right? If you were going to write a story, would you, and you wanted that story to display and show all the glory and deity of God, would you, this is my question, write a story where many of the main characters look like a bunch of morons? Would you do that? As you read the Gospels, and we talk about the disciples. What are the disciples always doing?
Making mistakes.
They're making mistakes. They don't understand. They're betraying, right? They're getting in trouble. They're asking selfish or dumb questions, right?
Yes. They kill it.
Novels didn't exist 2,000 plus years ago. That all came recently. But if you were writing an eyewitness account of this is what happened, right? Then whatever it was would be whatever it is, whether it puts somebody in a good light or puts somebody in a bad light. Let me give you another example. During the time that this was written, and I'm giving you things that you can talk to people who are questioning, seeking, or they have a hardened heart. How were women treated 2,000 years ago in this society?
Bad.
Okay, well, bad. In that culture, at that time, did women have rights?
No.
No. Could women own property?
No.
No. Who was head of the family?
Man.
The man. Okay? If you were going to write a story 2,000 years ago, would women have a prominent and an important role many times over?
No.
No. So for example, very countercultural. Okay? Who found Jesus? For those of you that know the rest of the story, when the stone is rolled away, who's there? Right? Women, right? Who go and tell who? The disciples. Who did what? We didn't believe them, right? Do you see it? So if you're going to write a story, and I'm giving you things that you can use with 13-year-olds or 20-year-olds or 40-year-olds or 60-year-olds or 80-year-olds, just things that you can think about. Let me give you another example. Next week, theoretically, if we go a little faster, we're going to turn the page into the end of this 24 hours and we're going to talk about the storm. If you were going to write a story back then that is just the facts, that was an eyewitness, there's so many details that seem like innocuous details that are in there. So for example, next week when we talk about the storm, and if you want to look ahead you can, and it describes Jesus sleeping in a boat while a storm is going on, there's a little detail that says that Jesus was sleeping on what? A pillow, a cushion, right? You can go to Mark towards chapter 14 and 15, and it talks about how in the Garden of Gethsemane there was someone there who was naked, right? Which could have been the author Mark. There are details all along the way that are these details that how would you know? Why would you even think to put that in there unless you were what? Unless you were there, okay? There are many, many, as you mentioned, more reasons, but in terms of layman's term, there's just 3 or 4 as you're sitting around a table and somebody says, it's just a bunch of words. You know, what is it? It's nothing. And now you have something that you can give back. So the first question there had to do with hardened hearts. What's the second question? Second question is, do you believe that in your heart are sin and brokenness, that you are a lost person? Now we're talking about ourselves. Or do you believe that you are basically a good person, that you have it figured out? I'll give you the third one. Do you believe that without the sacrificial work of Christ, you are lost, no matter your good behavior? Or do you believe that your behavior makes you pleasing to God and therefore He accepts you? These are all questions not to debate at this second, but think about them, not just for your own lives, but as you see in others. To the degree that we understand these things is to the degree that the seed, the Word, is working deep within our hearts. Let me give you the fourth one. Do you believe that Christ willingly forgives you your sin, welcomes you into His family, and gives you a new name? Or do you believe that Christ couldn't have possibly died for you or wants to have anything to do with you or understands your situation? Some of you right now as you read these are like, well, of course, it's number 1, not number 2. There are many, many, many people that number 1 struggle with these. But number 2, as we go through these scenarios, to the degree that you, me, actually live out these 3 questions is to the degree that the seed has gone deep in our lives. I want to show you in a moment. The reality is, even though you may turn around and say to number 1, of course, the reality is sometimes when the heat comes, when the conflict comes, we may act in a way that is contrary to what we say that we believe. Why? Because inside we are sinful and broken people and lost people in need of a Savior, and when the heat comes, it can come out. Okay? Now, let me give you one other one, and it's the one for the end, right, before we do the scenarios. But I would also challenge you, because this is the challenge for myself, to the degree that you see question number 1 as amazing, crazy beautiful, magnificent, is to the degree also that this seed works down into your lives. For example, do you believe that without the sacrificial work of Christ you're lost no matter your good behavior? As you marinate on that, as that flows down into our heart, as we think about the grace that's involved there, that in order to bridge the gap, God Himself came to the earth and gave the sacrifice for us, to the degree that you find that earth-shatteringly amazing, is to the degree that this seed is working deep into your life. You all have a question on that? Do you see that to some degree? Let me give you another illustration. I used to watch religiously Antiques Roadshow. Do you all watch Antiques Roadshow? Okay. Now I can look at past episodes, and for some dumb reason, the other day I was actually watching past episodes of Antiques Roadshow. So what was an antique then is even now more of an antique now. And then I found out that they've had the last few years, they like revisit it and tell you if the value went up or down again. But are you all familiar with Antiques Roadshow? You know how that works? Okay, so somebody comes in with this object, this beautiful Dasani plastic bottle, and they have been using it as a doorstop for 30 years, or they pulled it out of an attic. Now, you need to know that half the crud on that thing is worth like nothing, right? But some of them, it's pretty fun. They bring in this Dasani bottle or whatever it is that they've been using as a doorstop for 20 years, and then they have these appraisers that sit there and look at it all and discuss about themselves, etc. And they come back, and what the person thought was worthless, they come back and say that it's worth $20,000 or $30,000 or $50,000, or the one with the rhinoceros deal was what, like $1 million or whatever it was, okay? Because you couldn't get any more because they're endangered. While they're telling the person that, what is that person doing? What is their face doing? Okay, shock, surprise, okay? When they came in, What were they doing with the Dasani bottle? You know, oh, here you go. There's my doorstop, right? They treat it as nothing, right? I got this thing. I just want to see what it is, right? But as their face changes, what happens to the Dasani bottle? Oh my goodness. Here we go. Let's go get here, you know, instead of being at the doorstop, what happens to it? Oh, it's going to go on the mantle, right? Malcolm said it's going to go right there. We're going to go put a spotlight in, and the spotlight's going to go right on it. What happened? This dusty doorstop became in their eyes what? You know, isn't that the little thing? It's worth a zillion, right? It became worthy. It became beautiful. It became magnificent. It became glorious. And therefore, we started out by saying that what you believe dictates how you live your life. If you think it's worthless or old hat or it's got some utility, it's a doorstop, where is it? It's on the floor. You can kick it. You can do whatever. But if you see it as beautiful, if you see it as worth something, if you see it as magnificent, where does it go? A place of honor, right? What you believe dictates how you live your life and how you view things. Okay? Let me give you the scenarios, and these are just a few. And if you like to play this in your home study, you can do this on the ride home because you can do it with every single one of them. So let's talk about how deep the seed goes. So scenario A, if you flipped over here, right, and I have this non-fruit words on this right-hand tree, let's just pick one. Let's take resentment rather than kindness. Okay? So kindness on the tree on the left, resentment on the tree on the right. Have any of you experienced resentment? Okay? Sure. So why? You feel resentment rather than kindness. Why would somebody feel resentment?
Someone hurt me.
Okay? Somebody hurt you. Okay? The root of resentment. Now remember, peach tree is a peach tree, apple tree is an apple tree. Okay? In this example, the fruit or non-fruit that's there is resentment. We said earlier, what you believe dictates how you live your life. So that root system that has made this tree that is displaying resentment, where does that mean that root system is? It's in the roots of what? What's the roots of resentment? You said somebody hurt you. What else?
Justice.
It's justice, right? Resentment comes from a root that says, this isn't fair. This isn't right. I've been wrong, right? This was right. You've done this. There's the disparity. Somebody's got to pay, right? Resentment. So, I feel resentment. The opposite of kindness. A root system that comes out of injustice that's there. So let me ask the question. It's a question of how deep the seed goes. How does the gospel help us understand injustice?
With love
Okay, love. What else?
and forgiveness.
Forgiveness.
Praying for them and blessing them.
In between the two trees. The tree on the left, right, that has a fruit of resentment. The tree on the left that has a fruit of kindness. In between those two trees is a third tree. What is it? It's the cross. Okay? How do I live a life? I'm human. I feel resentment. I feel these fruits that are on this tree. How do I get the seed down deep? How is that possible? Well, in between is the cross. So, how does the gospel, how does the cross help understand injustice?
When you understand, you don't deserve it.
Okay? I am broken and I am lost. Okay? I am deserving of God's wrath. Right? And yet with me, how has He treated me?
With kindness and love.
Kindness and love, with grace. He bridged the gap of injustice. Okay?
Because He is the judge.
So the gospel can help, we'll finish this in just a moment, by reflecting on, wait a minute, There's this disparity between myself and God, and look what He has done for me. Why then am I holding on to this with this person or this relationship? That's not to say that you don't get angry. Righteous anger is part of being human. It happens. It may happen every day. Sometimes it can be very good, right? But resentment is not, right? Then holding on. Let's do the second one real quick. Now you get the hang of it, okay? You feel impatience rather than forbearance. Why? Where does impatience come from? I'm an impatient person. I am. Like, patience is so hard, okay? I'm always moving, like I told you last week. My base nature is future-oriented, which sometimes gets me in trouble because I'm not where? In the present, okay? So patience gets hard with me, right? I've already explained that how many times? Yeah, you already hear it, right? I've already explained it 20 times. This isn't happening the way that I planned it in life. I planned all this. I wrote it all down. I made my list. I've done, right? Do you see it? Where impatience can come in. What's the root of impatience? Selfishness. Okay. Okay. What else do you think? Right? So impatience, I'll just list some things. Yeah, okay. So, impatience can come from several things. I put some of them down here, but some of them are things like intolerance. I don't like this situation that I'm in, and therefore I want it to change, and that delta to get from A to B causes impatience, right? We can turn around with restlessness. This idea that the present moment is not good enough, I've got to do something else, right? The intolerance part can also come from this idea. I know what I'm doing, and I got it figured out. What's so-and-so's problem? Do you see it? What am I really saying when that happens? That's intolerance, right? Everybody moves at different speeds. Everybody has different skill sets and different gifts, right? Nobody is exactly like you. What's that sentence? If everybody was like you, everything goes swimmingly or something like that. Reality was, if everybody's like you, you'd probably be in conflict all the time, right? In some of these things. So how does the gospel help with intolerance? This idea, just take the one. I'm impatient because somebody else isn't getting it. Or flip it. Somebody else has something that I don't have, and I want to get from here to there, right? But I want to do it. I gave you the illustration earlier of working in the yard, and I told you how I like to see it all nice and pretty, but what did I not want to do? The work. When the reality is, for it to look nice and pretty, what do you got to do? You got to do the work, okay? How does the gospel help with intolerance? Say again? Somebody already did the work, right? Right? Exactly right. Just like on the justice, at the cross, someone that was undeserving, somebody that was deficient, okay? Here, he showed the ultimate tolerance. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's do the last one quickly. So you feel anxiety and despondency rather than peace. Anxiety can come from what? Insecurity. A lack of what? A lack of control. Hopelessness. So, let me give you an illustration on this one. I often hear quoted, God is going to order your what? Steps. God is not going to put more on you than what? Okay? Everybody says it. Right? And then life comes, right? And something happens, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're experiencing what? Anxiety. How do those two things exist? Either A, one's true, or B, the other's true. Do you see it? So how does the gospel help? How does the gospel help in that? Right? Gives you hope. The reality is, let's just use the common, I'll give you a global one, right? Last week, the illustration I gave you was a local one where I said I got in the car with a kid, and the kid promptly put in their ear pods and for 30 minutes didn't talk to me while they texted, okay? I think I'm a good person. I think everything's great. All of a sudden that happened, and what happened to me? Roar, right? What's inside of you can come out when the heat comes. Let me give you a global one that's maybe not as personal. What are you reading in the paper right now that's happening across the water? War, okay? I don't know how you feel about that. This is one also that kids ask about as well as others, right? Israel's hemmed in, right? So you got the Gaza territory, you got the Palestinian territory, and you got the Iranians. And what are we doing? We are sending what?
Money.
Well, not just money. We're sending warships and expertise and all kind of things. This past week, somebody came up to me from the shop floor and said, will you pray with me? Because their son was being what? Deployed, okay, over there. What was this gentleman experiencing? Fear, anxiety. I express that as well in life. I told you either A is true or B is true, but they both can't be true. So how does the gospel help? When it comes to justice, I believe that God is a God of restoration, and at the end all things will be made right. What you believe dictates how you live your life. And because I believe that, yes, I am somewhat fearful of this. Yes, there is this level of I don't understand all of it. Yes, I don't want there to be suffering or loss of life. Yes, these are horrible, terrible things. They are evil in this broken world. And yet, because of the gospel, I can have peace. That's not ignoring, that's not looking away, but because I believe that He's going to put all things right, I know that according to His plan, it will work out. Whether that means we all go to war, whether that means it all ends peacefully, that's not my burden to carry. Do you see that?
Yes.
You see how the gospel can help in this here. And so, and here, even though I told you I was going to go so much slower, the reality is you just run out of time, because what I wanted to talk about, we got 3 minutes. How does the gospel go deep into your life? How do we make it to where, how do we participate in this word going down deep? Some thoughts?
By studying
Okay.
and feeding on it and believing what God is saying.
Okay.
Because He has not lied to us yet.
Okay. That's no less than that. Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah.
This lesson we have today is about sowing seed. Does God sow only good seed?
Does God sow only good seed? And you're going to ask that question with 2 minutes to go.
God does.
Okay? So maybe I'll answer it this way. Okay? I think the gospel message is good seed. Okay? For
Well, if you could look at the people, we know, every one of us know people that when they were first baptized, became Christians, they were gung-ho. And they got older, they got more worldly. Some of them have fallen away completely. You can't talk to them.
okay, so let's just
Is
use.
that seed bad to start with?
No, and actually, you're ending this great. What did you just describe? We talked about at the very beginning, and you mentioned that it's a sower casting the seed, and it fell on 4 types of hearts. Okay? What is the heart that you just described? You actually described 2. You described the seed falling on rocky soil, and then actually you described seed that's falling on a shallow heart, right? A tree that we could say might be on the right with a shallow system. But that's not the word, right? That's in the condition of the heart.
A cotton farmer, he plants seed that's been delinted and been treated for all kinds of things, but he don't always get 100% growth on his cotton. They don't come up 100%. Getting some bad seed in there.
So I think where the analogy I would maybe disagree is this. But I'll tie it in here, and then maybe we end with this as well. I think the sower is a good sower, right? It's Christ. I think the gospel message is good seed. Okay? In the illustration, when we first started, where is Christ giving this message? What is He doing physically? He's in a boat, right? And He's in a boat, it implies with who? Disciples. Okay? Let's start there. In the boat are His disciples, His followers, who He has named, right? We talked about that. But you know, Paul Harvey, the rest of the story. Of those 12 disciples, what happens with at least one of them? Right? Okay? That's right. Even in those that He's called with that good seed, in the heart of Judas, right, there is a different outcome. Who are the other characters that are there? As He's speaking, who's arrayed in front of Him? The crowd, right? The crowd we read about that came for hours, for 100 miles from different spots. In that crowd, where He's speaking, and the use of the parable, are all kinds of hearts. A different topic, a different time. I think that God knows there's all kinds of different hearts, but it does not change the power and the efficacy and the life-giving potential of the seed. And so that's why today what I'm saying is this: that seed, it's a question of depth, how far it goes. Let's end with that, and I missed the punch here. I'll do it very quickly. I think it's more than just intellectual thinking, right? So it is true that on the left-hand side, we talk about responding. On the right-hand side, the word I used was reacting. A reacting is very what? Off-the-cuff primal, right? It is whatever you're feeling that moment, bam-o, here you go. How many of you have mouthed off to somebody you care about, right, in a moment? Okay, thankfully, I asked that, and I'm like, man, what if nobody raises... Okay, right? So, a reaction as opposed to a response, which implies in it more thoughtful care, right? That's a difference between the two. I think it's more than just intellectual, though, right? The reality is I can water two different red buds the same way. They can be in the same soil, and yet one of them is very different than the other. It also has to do with, as David mentioned this morning, community, those that are around you. It has to do with things, your personal responsibility, not just God's sovereignty, but your personal responsibility in choices that you make. So it's much more than just, it's not less than intellectual, but it involves everything that of living life in community and together that takes that seed and pushes it all the way down. Questions about today? There's part of me this minute that's like, trying to go slower, and then I'm like, but I want to do this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this, and the reality is what? It's good enough for today. Let's say a prayer. Hang on one second. Yes, sir, real quick.
You can take a branch from this tree and crack it in this tree and grow up this tree.
So that analogy is one from Romans 9 and 10, right? But my argument for this case is this, and we'll do it and I'll close with a word of prayer. I think to be fruitful, to be truly fruitful with a deep understanding of the Word happens by reflection of the cross and being tied by the Spirit. That's what the streams of living water, that's what the Holy Spirit is there. Just like when it comes to, and I don't mean to leave this way, but it's an example. A moment ago when I talked about Israel and I talked about how I can have peace and not anxiety because I know that God has it. Okay? Whatever that looks like, whether that involves suffering or loss or joy or hope, I believe that He has it. An example is this. I don't know how you would live your life without that kind of hope. Right? Because the alternative is what? Doesn't matter what I do. When I die, I rot. I go to dust. Dust I came, dust I'll be. In other words, it doesn't matter. Without hope, What you believe dictates how you live your life. Without that hope of restoration, I don't know how that works. I can't imagine that, because that's part of what propels us, that part of what skates us over the high and low. And therefore, without the gospel, the cross, to fill that gap, I don't know how you become fruitful without the cross, is what I'm getting at. Let's close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this chance to try again, to talk about how your word, how it looks in our life as we take that seed, Father, prayerfully down deep into our heart, as we marinate on it, as we reflect on it, as we live it out in community, as we make mistakes, as we walk with you, constantly going back, connected through that stream to what you've done, what your Son has done, unmerited for us. Father, we pray that that might encourage us as we leave this place. Watch over us, we ask. We pray this in your Son's holy name. Amen.